はい、それではお時間になりましたので、シンポジウムの方を始めさせていただきます。皆様、本日はご対応のところ、アイルランド・アットワーク・エンプロイメント・ロー&インダストリアル・リレーションズ・イナ・グローバル・エコノミー・シンポジウムにご参加いただき、誠にありがとうございます。ご講演に関しましては、英語でのご講演となりますので、同時通訳のこちらのレシーバーの方をご装着いただければと思います。こちらを耳にかけていただきまして、電源を、こちらの電源マークを押していただき、チャンネルを1に合わせていただきますと、英語が日本語で同時通訳される形となっております。こちらの左手の、ボリュームの方、左手のボタンで操作できますのでよろしくお願いいたします。装着方法等わからない方は、係の者がご案内いたしますので、おっしゃっていただければと思います。はい、ご挨拶遅れまして恐縮です。私、司会のブレクサクロスボーダーの藤本真也でございます。本日はどうぞよろしくお願いいたします。本日はアイルランドの雇用法制及び労使関係の最新動向を手がかりに、グローバル経済化の人事、労務人事に関する示唆を実務・研究の両面から探ってまいります。会場の皆様にお願いでございます。携帯電話はマナーモードにご設定ください。写真、録音等はできませんのでよろしくお願いいたします。なお、本シンポジウムの内容は後日、弊社ホームページにて公開予定でございます。ぜひそちらも合わせてご覧いただければ幸いです。それでは、ご登壇いただく皆様をご紹介させていただきます。まず皆様から向かって右手にお座りの方がシャロン・バイズ様です。シャロン様はアイルランドの CPL 社にて最高人事責任者としてCEO 直轄のもと人事戦略全体を統括されております。アイルランドおよび英国における約1万4000名の組織の人事戦略をリードし、採用・育成・定着をはじめインクルージョンや学習文化の推進、さらにはコンプライアンスから組織変革に至るまで幅広い領域で卓越したご実績をお持ちです。また NPO オープンドアーズ理事を務められているほか、 CIPD 上級フェローとして国際的な人事の専門家コミュニティでも高く評価されていらっしゃいます。続きましてパネリストのコリーン・クレアリー様をご紹介いたします。コリーン様は国際法律事務所シモンズ&シモンズ LLP アイルランドのパートナーとしてご活躍されており、同事務所の雇用法部門を統括する責任者を務めていらっしゃいます。企業向けの雇用法に関する助言をはじめ、訴訟対応にも豊富なご経験をお持ちです。医療、テクノロジー、金融など幅広い業界のクライアントを支援されています。また、アイルランドおよびイングランド、ウェールズの弁護士資格を有し、国境を越えた雇用問題にも精通しておられるなど、グローバルに活躍される専門家として高い評価を得ていらっしゃいます。 それでは最後に、パネリストとして、ご参画される、京都大学法学部教授島田裕子先生をご紹介いたします。島田先生は社会法学・労働法をご専門とされ、日本の労働法政策に関する研究を牽引してこられた第一人者でいらっしゃいます。平等取扱原則や労働契約の内容規則、主要判例の分析に加え、ドイツ労働法との比較法研究など、多岐にわたる分野で数多くのご成果を挙げられています。また、欧州における招待講演など国際的な研究発信にも積極的に取り組まれ、国内外で高い評価を受け取られます。それでは、続きまして、ご講演の方になります。それではシャロン様、ご講演よろしくお願いいたします。
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for that kind introduction and, of course, inviting myself and Colleen here today. We're really delighted to be here. And as Colleen was introduced, Colleen is a head of employment law at Simmons & Simmons, but she is also the employment law advisor for CPL. So I work very closely with Colleen on our people issues when things don't go as we had planned. So I'm going to talk to you today about Ireland at work, employment law and industrial relations in a global economy, and what that really means in practice for leaders and organisations. At the end of the presentation, I would anticipate that you would have a broader understanding of the Irish economic, social and labour landscape and have a general understanding of the operation of employment law and industrial relations in Ireland. I will start by briefly setting the context of who CPL is, the organisation that I work for, and the role that we play in Ireland's labour market. And I will then look at why Ireland continues to be an attractive place in which for organisations to locate and grow, before moving into the foundations of employment law, industrial relations, risk compliance, and leadership practice. And I'll also cover what's changing in 2026 from an Irish perspective, and finish with some key takeaways for international leaders and HR professionals. So, who is CPL? So CPL is Ireland's largest talent solutions provider, and we play a central role in connecting with people with purposeful work. Our services in the talent space span from recruitment right through to complex high-end business process outsourcing solutions. And we support organisations across Ireland and the UK to flex and scale their talent ambitions with confidence. We operate across 6 core business areas: recruitment, health and home care services, learning and development, BPO and managed talent solutions, consulting and strategic advisory. As an organisation, we have been operating in Ireland for 35 years, and we also have operations in the UK. And on a really good day, we would have a workforce of up to 14,200 people, and with an annual revenue of 800 million, and we have a 30% market share within Ireland. Around 95% of our business is repeat business, and more importantly, 65% of the Irish working population have had a touch point with CPL at some point. And this gives us a very real practical lens on how Ireland's labour market is operating. Over the 35 years of being in business, we have continually supported Ireland's economic growth. And this slide gives you a really good representation of the reach that we have within Ireland. We partner with about 5,000 plus clients on an annual basis. We have 18 offices in Ireland, and our payroll bill for last year alone was €560 million. We placed about 8,000 people in both permanent and temporary jobs, and we recorded 16.35 million hours worked across life sciences, finance, tech, and public services. It's important to say at this point that investing in people and empowering communities is not a separate agenda for us. It's core to how we operate Ireland's economy and labour market. We're very proud in CPL of the work that we do across, I suppose, from a social impact, diversity, equity, inclusion, and ESG perspective. We partner with our organisations such as the Irish Red Cross, Bernardo's and Open Doors, and we support individuals from marginalised backgrounds into sustainable employment. Equity, diversity and inclusion are central to how we operate, and we were one of the first organisations in Ireland to achieve Investors in Diversity Gold. And we were the first organisation to win the National Diversity and Inclusion Award in 2023 in Ireland. From an environment perspective, we set 32 goals across 5 SDGs, and we achieved our bronze EcoVadis rating a number of years ago and are continually working to improve that. And we're also a CDP B-rated organisation. So, why Ireland? So there's a number of levers that I want to talk about this morning. And I suppose what those levers do is they enable Ireland to present a strong proposition to companies considering setting up our organisations in Ireland. From a talent perspective, Ireland is fundamentally, it remains strong. We have 2.81 million people in Ireland that are in employment, and those figures were recorded in mid-2025. And the unemployment rate is currently at 4.8%. So ultimately, we're at full employment. But despite this tight market, labour force participation and inward migration, the Irish workforce does continue to expand. In the year to June 2025 alone, 65,700 new jobs were created and a further 60,000 are forecasted for 2026. And that's quite a significant forecast for a country. Compared to Japan, that's quite small. Ireland also produces a very strong pipeline of graduates, approximately 70,000 graduates annually, and that's across business, law, health, arts, humanities, and critically STEM. Ireland has the highest STEM population rate in Europe, and Dublin's universities alone produce around 20,000 graduates in each year. Immigration and EU mobility further expand Ireland's talent pool. EU movement provides access to a labour market of over 425 million people, while Ireland's employment permit system continues to attract critical skills globally, and notably about 80% of international students that study in Ireland remain in Ireland after graduation. One of the other levers is looking at the value and value creation. So beyond talent supply, Ireland offers a compelling value creation environment for organisations scaling operations. There are 6 factors that consistently drive success. The first is the cultural fit. Ireland's open, globally connected business culture is attractive to both employers and employees, and many organisations operate without a global headquarters here in Ireland, but yet benefit from strong local leadership capability. Second is the quality of life. Ireland is safe, cosmopolitan and socially connected, with many organisations employing from 30 or more nationalities within single locations. Third is the depth and quality of the workforce. Ireland ranks among the top global economies for competitiveness, and talent density remains a key advantage. Fourth is the credibility and experience. Major employers such as Google, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon and TikTok have substantial Irish operations, and their continued investment validates Ireland's proposition and has built a strong base of managerial and operational expertise. Fifth is innovation and adaptability. Ireland's ecosystem continues to evolve, with companies expanding into emerging areas such as AI. For example, OpenAI chose Ireland as its first EU office, enforcing Ireland's role in future-focused capability building. And finally, a critical enabler of all of this is foreign direct investment. And Ireland's long-standing coordinated approach, attracting organisations to set up operations in Ireland, which continues to differentiate Ireland in a highly competitive global market. Of course, no labour market is without its risks and challenges, and Ireland is no exception to that. With near full employment, competition for talent is intense. However, ongoing labour force growth and Ireland's relatively pro-business immigration stance help ease market tightness. Wage inflation is, of course, a factor, but many organisations, including employers such as Workday and Salesforce, have successfully scaled by assessing international talent and positioning themselves competitively rather than engaging in wage spirals. Housing and the cost of living remains the most frequent cited challenge, particularly in Dublin. While the government has committed to annual housing targets of approximately 33,000 new homes per year, pressure remains in response. Some employers provide relocation support. Some employers even buy houses to house their employees, or short-term accommodation, or other practical interventions. From an immigration perspective, changes to salary thresholds for certain permits have introduced additional complexity in recent years, particularly for technology and specialist roles. And navigating this effectively requires planning and local expertise. And finally, during global economic cycles, and in particular in 22-23, where the global tech correction took place, Ireland continued to achieve net FDI growth, supported by resilient sectors such as pharmaceutical, medtech and fintech, even amid high-profile tech restructures. So, why employment law and industrial relations matter? Ireland is often described as pro-enterprise, and that's true, but it's not a low-regulation labour market. Ireland is business-friendly because it offers predictable regulation, access to EU markets and strong legal certainty and operational freedom. But it is not deregulated. Employment law is clear and enforceable. Process and consultation matter, and informal practices can carry legal weight. But the balance between flexibility and protection is fundamental to understanding how Ireland works. So the foundations of employment law. So there are over 40 core pieces of legislation, of employment legislation in Ireland. And there are also a number of specialist areas that regularly interact with people decisions, including equality and discrimination, health and safety, data protection, pensions, immigration, whistleblowing and business transfers. That's where complexity often arises in for employers in practice. Employment law in Ireland is shaped by Irish legislation, EU law, constitutional principles and common law. And from a jurisdictional perspective, the system applies both to private and public sector, but the operating context can be different. In the private sector, organisations generally have greater commercial flexibility, but they are still fully bound by employment legislation, and they are subject to scrutiny through the Workplace Relations Commission and the Labour Court. In the public sector, the same principles apply, but there are additional layers of governance, including statutory codes, public pay agreements, and policy circulars. And expectations around process, consistency, and proportionality are typically higher, and discretion is more tightly constrained. So, when we talk about the core employment rights in Ireland, what we are really talking about is a system designed to protect people from unfair treatment while giving employers a clear framework for managing people safely, consistently and fairly. At its core, Irish employment law protects workers through fair pay, safe working conditions and freedom from discrimination, while also providing legal recourse when things go wrong, whether that's unfair dismissal, workplace harm, or a failure to follow due process. This framework is shaped by Irish legislation, EU law, and constitutional principles and common law, and it applies across all sectors, private, public, and voluntary. So this slide gives you a breadth or a sense of the breadth of areas covered. So it's everything from contracts of employment, working time and pay, discrimination, dismissal, data protection, industrial relations, and more recently areas like AI, remote working, and whistleblowing. And if I was to go through each one of those, we'd probably be here till next week. So rather than going through each one, it's more helpful to focus on the key entitlements that sit under all of these. So employees in Ireland are entitled to a written statement of core terms within 5 days of starting work, limits on working time, including a 48-hour average working week and rest breaks, a minimum of 4 weeks annual leave per year, access to statutory leave such as maternity, parental and sick leave, protection under minimum wage regulation, and increasingly rights like the right to disconnect and flexible working supports. Certainly these rights don't manage themselves. A solid understanding of Irish employment law is essential for anyone who manages people, whether that's a small, medium enterprise, a large multinational or the public sector. The responsibility does sit with the employer to ensure that these rights are realised in practice. And this means having the right to policies, procedures and leadership capability in place, not just to respond when something goes wrong and to prevent issues arising in the first place. Where employers invest in clear contracts, strong policies, fair processes and good communication, they significantly reduce the risk of disputes and create workplaces that are built on trust, consistency and respect. And when disputes do arise, which they inevitably will, the strength of those foundations often determine how quickly and effectively they can be resolved. So, ultimately, everything in Irish employment law comes back to 3 main principles: fairness, transparency, and due process. So performance, discipline, dismissal, and redundancy must follow clear, reasonable processes, and employees must understand decisions affecting them and to be given the opportunity to respond. And failure in due process are one of the most common sources of claims. So industrial relations and trade unions. So Ireland does operate a voluntary industrial relation system, and employers are not legally obliged to recognise trade unions, but choosing not to do so requires strong people practices, disciplined processes and confident, consistent leadership. Union density sits at around 23 to 28% and higher in the public sector and lower in private services, such as and multinationals and professional roles. The state does not take sides, and institutions such as the Workplace Relations Commission and the Labour Court focus on resolution, reasonableness and stability. However, organisations that mismanage industrial relations face real risks, including legal escalation, reputational damage and public scrutiny. So what is the role and the state of institutions? At this point, it's important to step back and look at the role of the state and its institutions in the Irish employment system. Ireland operates in a largely voluntary industrial relations model built on direct engagement between employers and employees. But that sits alongside a very strong statutory framework where the state sets minimum standards, provides dispute resolution mechanisms, and enforces compliance. The key thing to understand is that the state doesn't manage workplaces. It ultimately creates the rules of the road. And it has put in place independent institutions to oversee fairness and consistency and stability. This slide here covers the 6 key elements of how the state and its institutions shape employment law and industrial relations in Ireland. At the foundation is a clear legislative and policy framework. The government sets mandatory minimum standards across areas, like I've said before, as pay, working time, equality, health and safety, leave and dismissal. This is about employee protection, but it's also about creating a stable and predictable labour market. When we talk about economic regulation in this context, what we mean is balance, ensuring that workforce protections support sustainable employment, competitiveness and productivity, rather than creating instability or distortion in the labour market. Supporting that framework is a number of state institutions, and the most visible is the Workplace Relations Commission, which deals with adjudication, inspection, mediation and information, and alongside the bodies such as the Labour Court, the Health and Safety Authority, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission and the Data Protection Commission, all of which oversee specific aspects of employment and people management. The core functions of these institutions are relatively consistent. They support voluntary dispute resolution, ensure compliance with enforcement, and provide adjudication and redress where issues can't be resolved internally. Overseeing much of this from a policy and regulation perspective is the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and its role underpins enterprise and innovation, trade and investment, workplace skills, labour market regulation and employment policy development. In practical terms, that policy development includes areas such as employment legislation, redundancy and insolvency frameworks, work-life balance measures, employment permits, collective bargaining policy and responsiveness to EU-level directives. There are also other state departments that play an important role in employment relationships, including the Revenue Commissioners, who oversee taxation and payroll compliance, and the Department of Social Protection, who administer social insurance, statutory benefits and employment supports. Finally, Ireland has a long tradition of social dialogue. Social partners including trade unions, employer groups such as IBEC, which is the Irish Business for Employers Confederation, farming and agricultural bodies, and the community and voluntary sector, with government to help shape economic and social policy. Taken together, all of these elements form ultimately the employee relations ecosystem in Ireland. It's highly structured, deliberately balanced, and designed to promote fairness, stability and trust in employment relationships. However, when it does come to employment law in Ireland, there always is an element of risk. Risk most often arises from how decisions are made in practice, inconsistent judgment, weak processes, and day-to-day people management decisions that really are not well thought through. And for that reason, managing employment law risk is fundamentally a leadership responsibility, not just a HR one. This table, although it looks a little bit complicated, is designed to show how risk typically arises when what the system expects, and more importantly, what actually protects organisations in practice. Starting with dismissal and performance. The most common issue we see is a rush to an outcome. And as Colin would know, a lot of times my management team would say, I need to terminate this person within a very short space of time with no regard for the fair process that needs to be looked at. So decisions are made quickly because a manager wants a problem solved immediately and without enough feedback, consistency or evidence to support it. The system doesn't expect perfection, but it does expect fair procedures, and that really underpins everything from a dismissal and performance perspective. So it's about giving somebody the time to improve, having clear standards, the right to be heard, and the opportunity to appeal. What protects against here is clear process, trained managers and well-documented performance management over time, not decisions made under pressure. The next one then is equality and dignity at work. In equality and dignity at work cases, risk usually comes from poor handling of complaints, delayed responses, insufficient investigations, or breaches of confidentiality. The system expects a prompt, impartial, and proportionate response with procedural fairness for everybody involved. Organisations are best protected through strong policies, trained investigators, and timely, well-documented action that shows complaints are taken seriously. For working time and pay, issues often arise from successive working hours, poor record keeping, or errors in calculating holiday entitlements or other leave entitlements. Here the system is very clear. It expects legal compliance and accurate records. What protects employers are robust systems, clear rules, and regular compliance checks rather than reliance on informal practices or assumptions. Policies and training. With policies and training, risk tends to creep in when policies exist on paper but are not followed in practice, or when managers rely on common sense rather than what the policy actually says. The expectation is consistency, clarity, and awareness across the organisation. And organisations are protected when policies are fit for purpose and managers receive practical training on how to apply them in real scenarios. Documentation and evidence is another major risk. Gaps in notes, unclear rationale, or casual emails can seriously undermine an employer's position. The system expects decisions that can stand up to the Workplace Relations Commission or Labour Court scrutiny. Clear, contemporaneous records and a defensible rationale are often the difference between successfully defending a claim and losing one. And then finally, Workplace Relations Commission oversight and cost. There is organisations often underestimate the impact of inspections, claims, escalation and reputational risk. What the system looks for is good faith compliance and cooperation, early escalation, sound advice and a prevention-focused approach will almost always reduce cost, disruption and exposure. And finally, employment law risks isn't avoided by being reactive. It's avoided through 1, good judgment, 2, strong processes, and 3, consistent leadership. So what is the cost of getting it all wrong? And this is a very practical question. In Ireland, employment law failures don't just carry legal consequences. They carry financial, reputational, and operational impact, often at the same time. The first and most obvious cost is compensation and legal costs. That includes awards ordered by the Workplace Relations Commission, settlements made to avoid further escalation, and external legal and advisory fees. Compensation awards can reach up to 104 weeks remuneration, with discrimination awards of up to 2 years' pay. Adjudicators assess financial loss, mitigation, and critically whether the employer followed fair procedures. In equality cases in particular, awards can be uncapped, and it's not unusual to see 6-figure awards where procedural fairness or discrimination was found, even where the original issue may have appeared manageable. The second cost, which is rarely quantified, is management time and distraction. Senior leaders are pulled into investigations, hearings and strategy discussions, often for months, if not years. And I think myself and Colleen had one case that went on for 4 years, and it was a lot of time and money by the organisation. So that time is diverted away from running the business, leading teams and delivering results. There's also reputational damage, and this is especially significant in Ireland. Workplace relation commissions are public. Journalists can attend hearings. Legal representatives, unions and interest groups monitor outcomes closely. And the impact on the employer brand, attraction and trust can be long-lasting, well beyond the outcome of a legal case. And the fourth impact is on employee relations. When issues are handled poorly, trust erodes within an organisation, complaints increase, and a culture of claims can develop, and in some cases it can accelerate unionisation, particularly where employees feel unheard or treated unfairly. There's also operational disruption, one of the hardest costs to measure. Delays, inconsistency, reduced service quality and management focus pulled into disputes or investigations always affect performance in ways that don't show up neatly on a balance sheet. And finally, there's ongoing compliance and scrutiny. Organisations that get things wrong often find themselves subject to increased audits, inspections and heightened regulatory or union attention, creating a cycle of ongoing oversight rather than closure. When you look at these costs together, the message is clear. The biggest risks in Ireland don't come from doing the right thing carefully. They come from rushing decisions, cutting corners, and relying on poor processes. So I now want to take a step back and place Ireland in its global employment context. Ireland operates within a globally recognised employment framework and deliberately balances international standards with business flexibility. That balance is a big part of why Ireland continues to attract and retain multinational employers. From an international standards perspective, Ireland is strongly aligned with European Union directives, International Labour Organisation conventions, and global norms around employee protection, equality and fair treatment. For global organisations, that provides credibility, consistency and reassurance that operations in Ireland meet internationally accepted benchmarks. Ireland is also an active participant at EU level. While we implement EU employment legislation, we do so with a pragmatic, business-aware approach. The result is a system that protects employees without creating unnecessary rigidity for employers. When you look at global comparisons, Ireland sits in a relatively unique position. It is more flexible than more continental European systems. And I know Colleen might cover this in our panel discussion when we compare against the likes of France and Germany and unionisation. But we are more structured and predictable than lightly regulated jurisdictions. That makes it particularly attractive for organisations that need to scale. Our dispute resolution model is another differentiator. Institutions such as the WRC and labour market are transparent, accessible and predictable, where organisations have strong processes and documentation. Risk is generally manageable and outcomes are rarely surprising. From a broader business environment, Ireland offers a clear legal framework, well-established case law and consistent enforcement that supports long-term planning, investment decisions and operational stability. And finally, when it comes to multinational success, the evidence speaks for itself. Ireland has a very high concentration of global employers with a long-term presence. And those organisations that invest in strong people practices tend to achieve stability, resilience and sustained growth. So the message is really clear. Ireland is very much on the global stage when it comes to employment. It offers a mature, credible and balanced framework that supports both employees and businesses and rewards organisations that get the fundamentals right. I think it's also important to note why multinationals succeed in Ireland. And this slide brings together the 5 core reasons why multinationals continue to succeed and scale in Ireland over the long term. The first is Ireland's corporate tax regime and incentives. Ireland's 12.5% corporation tax, combined with research and development tax credits and innovation supports, provide certainty and competitiveness for organisations making long-time investment decisions. The second, of course, is the strength of the talent pool and education system that we have in Ireland. It has a very young and highly educated workforce. We have an English-speaking workforce with deep capability across STEM, life sciences and pharmaceuticals. And that talent base supports both innovation and the ability to scale operations quickly. Third is the strategic access to the EU market. As a stable Eurozone member, Ireland often offers unrestricted access to the EU single market of over 425 million people. And it is the only English-speaking country in the European post-Brexit. And that positioning continues to be a major advantage for global employers. The fourth factor is Ireland's pro-business and stable regulatory environment. Employers benefit from consistent regulation, strong intellectual property protection and active state support through IDA Ireland, which provides long-term certainty rather than short-term intervention. And finally, Ireland benefits from established industry clusters and ecosystems. So there is a strong concentration in technology, life sciences and medtech, with organisations such as Google, Apple, Meta, Medtronic and Boston Scientific. And these all drive collaboration, skills development and sustained inward investment. Taken together, these factors explain why Ireland isn't just a location of choice for initial entry, but a place where multinationals continue to grow, reinvest and build long-term capability. So, what are the key changes in 2026? So looking ahead, 2026 is really a pivot year in Ireland. And I think it's important that I finish briefly looking ahead at those key changes, because they represent a meaningful shift in the employment landscape in Ireland. The first is pension auto-enrolment. This commenced on the 1st of January 2026 and has fundamentally changed how pensions are managed for many employers. And ultimately, it introduces new administration, cost and communication responsibilities for employers. And this is particularly for organisations that don't currently offer pension coverage to all employees. And this piece of legislation has been in discussion for 25 years in Ireland. So it is a welcome piece of legislation for those employees who are not covered by pension. The second one is gender pay gap reporting. We have now, at CPL, we've reported since 2022 on our gender pay gap. But that continues to expand with increased scrutiny, not just on the numbers, but on the expectations, the actions that you set as an employer in which you're going to address your gender pay gap, and also the demonstration of the follow-through that sits behind those. The EU Pay Transparency Directive will go further again on gender pay, introducing new requirements around pay disclosure, job architecture and justification of pay differences between men and women on the same grades and levels. For many organisations, this will require a rethink of reward structures rather than simple compliance. And it's expected that that legislation will be transposed and ready for June this summer. The Platform Work Directive will affect organisations that rely on freelance or platform-based working models, particularly around employment status, and which is typically managed by algorithms that control work allocation and worker protections. Changes to the European Works Council's Directive will increase expectations around consultation, information rights and cross-border engagement for multinational employers. and that will have an impact on trade union recognition in the long term. The Artificial Intelligence Act is another significant development, as the use of AI in recruitment, performance management and decision-making grows. Employers will face new governance, transparency and risk management. And as an organisation for CPL that's involved in recruitment, we would be classified as a high-risk organisation because of the way in which our systems could be structured in an AI environment. We will also continue to see developments around mandatory retirement ages, requiring employers to objectively justify retirement policies and manage age-related issues more carefully. And finally, there will be further developments. The programme for government in Ireland for 2025 included a commitment to introduce paid surrogacy leave. And in 2025, Ireland brought to government the Pregnancy Loss and Miscellaneous Provisions Bill. And this bill provides statutory paid leave, an estimated 5 working days of paid leave for a pregnant person and 2.5 days for the other parent, regardless of service length, subject to medical certification. But this bill is still at early stages. And then the Protection of Employers' Insolvency Amendment Bill 2025 aims to provide greater protection to employees where their employer becomes insolvent. The bill will allow employees to apply to the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment to deem their employment insolvent and open access to the Social Protection Fund to seek reimbursement of pay-related entitlements. So there's a lot going on in 2026. So key takeaways for international leaders. So to bring everything together, there are a few takeaways for international leaders operating or considering operating in Ireland. First, Ireland remains stable, predictable, and of course pro-business. This hasn't changed. The fundamentals around talent, access and economic stability are still strong. Second, employment risk in Ireland is manageable, and that is the key thing, but only when organisations invest in prevention, strong processes and good documentation. Risk doesn't come from the system, it comes from the weak execution. Third, industrial relations in Ireland is pragmatic and relationship-led, not adversarial. Outcomes are heavily influenced by how organisations engage, communication and behave over time. Fourth, Irish institutions consistently value reasonableness, good faith and fair process. How decisions made are matters just as much as what is decided. So looking ahead for 2026, it represents a cumulative change, not a single tipping point. The organisations that succeed will be those that plan in an integrated way across HR, legal and leadership, rather than reacting piece by piece. And ultimately, the real differentiator in Ireland is local leadership capability, not the legislation itself. Strong leaders, supported by good systems, make Ireland work exceptionally well. Thank you very much.
コリーン様、島田様より、各5分程度でコメントをいただきたいと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I think we've just heard there now is an excellent overview of what's happening in Ireland from Sharon, not just socially from what's happening in Ireland, but a really good grounding in an employment law. So if you're going to get asked about employment law in Ireland, read her paper again. So just from my perspective, I think that the fact that Ireland is politically very stable actually impacts greatly on the development of employment law in Ireland. But politically, like, Ireland is very stable, and I think that really helps the employment law and the political situation in Ireland. You don't get the swings. So why are we stable? We're stable because we always have a coalition government, not just one government in power. There's like it'd be 3 parties come together. And why is that important for employment law in Ireland? Well, you don't get the changes. So compared to the US or the UK, the parties change and everything changes overnight. So, for example, in the UK at the moment, you have to have 2 years before you get rights not to be unfairly terminated. But that's going to change very quickly to 6 months. And in the UK, the maximum compensation for unfair dismissal is like 52 weeks, but that's going to change to unlimited. So businesses being very rocked in the UK. So we don't get that. We have it very consistent. Some people say we're a bit boring, but but it's good for business because it's stable. So I think that's a point that you've emphasised quite a lot. The other issue, if you're interested in Irish employment law, and obviously you all are because you're here, the issue of fair procedures kind of permeates everything. And why is that? As Sharon was saying, you have the contract, you've got statutes, you've got the European directives that make up employment law in Ireland. But underlying all of that is the Constitution. And the Constitution is the document that was used to establish the state of Ireland. And what that provides in it very clearly is your right to a fair hearing, your right to be heard, your right to defend yourself. So if you take anything from this lecture, that permeates all of Irish employment law, because you're going to go, it applies all through the disciplinaries or the unfair dismissals or the investigations. And when you go to court, it's always about, did you give the individual a right to fair procedures? And people are very aware of that. They're very aware of their constitutional rights and very proud of that. So that will always permeate everything. Sharon also talked about transparency and the transparency of employment law and how that operates. And that's very important because under European law, and I'm not sure Professor, if you have this here, but the GDPR, the right to access information, personal data about yourself, and there's so many ways to document information in the employment relationship, on email, on texts, Slack internal messaging, and that's all documented. So an employee can ask for that information in employment or after employment and gather that information. And I also do court work, so that happens. It all gets disclosed. So you have to be very careful what you say, what you do about an employee, because they can request access to that. The only way around that is to take legal advice. That's why you have me. And it becomes legally privileged because then it's protected information because I'm giving legal advice. And then the other interesting thing then is around trade unions that we talked about, and the fact that there's quite low union density. But again, industrial action is quite rare really in Ireland. It's kind of, you don't get mass industrial action. You don't get the kind of the fight between the unions and the employer in the same way. It's not as regulated. So, it's your choice whether you collectively bargain. It's your choice whether an employee whether an employee can join a union or not. So, we're dealing with a situation at the moment where people are in the tech industry, where you're involved, where there's not quite low union density. So a lot of unions are losing their membership in retail because retail's gone down now. Like post-COVID, everything's online. So they're trying to look for other areas like tech. But, there are ways to sort of deal with that, and there's no enforced legal union recognition. But there will be kind of some European directives coming down the line to promote more collective bargaining in Ireland. So that may change a bit, but I don't think radically so. So they're really my kind of observations. Like I said, I agree with everything Sharon said. So it's a really great insight into what's happening in Ireland at the moment.
それでは、私の方からも、コメントをさせていただきます。まずは大変示唆に富むご講演をありがとうございました。アイルランドと日本の労使関係を比較したときに、労使関係が対立的ではないという点では、共通点があるのかなというふうに、感じました。他方、アイルランドと日本で非常に対照的な点がある。違う点はたくさんあると思うんですけど、私が大変注目しているのが、法的な予測可能性があるという点です。 例えばご講演の中にありましたように、解雇など労働紛争の解決の多くは、労使にとって予測可能なものであるというふうにおっしゃっていましたが、これ非常に、日本と対照的ではないかと思います。日本でも一応解雇に関して法的なルールはございますし、判例上一定のルールの蓄積はあります。しかし実際に紛争になった場合に、裁判所が行うのは総合判断ですね。労働者側の事情と使用者側の事情を比較して、どうするかという総合判断になりますので、予測可能性という点では非常に低いと言われています。実際に地裁、高裁というふうに進級していくに従ってですね、裁判所が全く違う判断をすることも決して少なくはありません。そういった予測可能性の低さから大企業を中心として解雇を過度に恐れるリスクと感じるところも多くて、実際解雇はほとんどリスクなどでしたくないという使用者も多いと聞いております。それがまた日本の経済的な成長にとってマイナスな面は大きいのではないかというふうに考えております。また、予測可能性という点で言いますと、解雇などの労働紛争についてもそうですし、日本で最近議論になっているのが、そもそも労働法が適用されるのかっていう論点ですね。フリーランスなのか労働者なのかと言ったその点でもかなり予測の可能性が低いと言われています。労働者の中にも裁量を持って自分で自分の仕事を決定して働いていくような人もいれば、フリーランスと呼ばれる人の中にも一定の一部の企業にほとんど専属するような形で働いている人もいるわけで、一体どこからが労働法が適用される労働者なのかと、そのあたりからもうすでに予測可能性がないと問題じゃないかというふうに言われています。で、そういった点でアイルランドにおけるその予測可能性の高さというのは、多くの外資系の企業、日本も含めて、企業にとってはかなり魅力的に映るのではないかというふうに感じました。私から以上です。ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございました。それではただいまよりアイルランドの最新労働事情をグローバルな視点で捉えるというテーマでお三方にディスカッションをお願いいたします。ディスカッションのテーマについては今後 1,2 年の注目論点とさせていただきます。例えば EU の動向、アイルランドにおける雇用法制の動向、または労使関係の動向、テック産業の人材構造、学習文化と定着施策など、そういったところでディスカッションをよろしくお願いいたします。
私から質問させていただいてもよろしいでしょうか。はい。EU の最近の動向として、ご講演の中でもいくつか挙げていただいたと思うんですけれども、特にアイルランドにとって、影響が大きいものというのはどういったものがあるでしょうか。
Well, you were just mentioning there a moment ago about gig work, about the gig economy and whether people are contractors or employees. So we can have the Platform Workers Directive, which is going to come into force, which gives certainty around employees that are employed like Uber drivers or kind of gig economy working on the internet workers. There's going to be more certainty around whether they're employees or whether they're contractors. Now, the Irish law, in any event, is quite evolved and is again quite certain compared to, say, the UK, where people were deemed to be contractors or work and not employees. Where in Ireland, the definition is quite clear, and the revenue is quite clear about who is an employee. So typically, gig economy workers are probably employees in Ireland in any event. So the Platform Workers Directive is important, but I mean, we're probably ahead of that anyway in terms of that certainty. And obviously, if you're deemed an employee in Ireland, you have the array of protective rights around annual leave, notice, the right to terms and conditions, a statement of terms and conditions of employment. The other big directive coming down the line, you might have mentioned the EU Pay Transparency Directive, and that's due to be implemented in Ireland by June 2026. We're still waiting for the draft legislation on that, but that's another debate to be had. But what we already have the gender pay gap, as we've talked about already, which applies to organisations now with 50 employees. You have to report on your gender pay gap. Ireland has a gender pay gap of about 9.6, which is lower than the EU average, which is around 12 and 13%. But the Pay Transparency Directive is basically gender pay gap on speed. It's a bolstered version because of what the gender pay gap is. And what the Pay Transparency Directive is about, it's all about gender pay and the differential in gender pay. And it's going to oblige employers to in the job adverts to explain exactly what the pay ranges are for that job. It's going to prevent employers from asking you about your salary at a job interview, your previous salary. It's going to prevent secrecy. Some employers, especially in the financial institutions, don't like people talking about their salary. It's going to prohibit pay secrecy. So it's quite broad, but probably the bigger part of it is that it requires employers initially to report by the following year, 2027, 2027, in relation to their pay, in relation to their job evaluation, and whether there is a kind of a gender pay, if there is already a differential. I'm trying to explain it, a differential in their pay based on gender. So it's going to require employers to apply a gender-neutral criteria to all of their roles and positions, and that's going to be based on skills, responsibility, efforts, and what's the other one? Working conditions as well. So what it's obliging employers to do is to look at their organisation through a gender lens to see if there's a differential in any of the jobs all at the same level, to identify whether there is a differential based on gender, because ultimately they're going to have to report on that in 2027. And if there's a 5% differential, they then have to do an assessment with the workers' representatives to try and address that. So the gender pay gap has been kind of quite limited in identifying differentials in pay, I would say, probably realistically. But the Pay Transparency Directive is completely different. It's much more powerful. It's going to really push the whole issue of gender pay gap between where people are performing the same work. So there's a lot of eyes on that, and employees are going to have a right to take a claim, backdating it to 3 years, and they will be awarded compensation if the employer cannot objectively justify why two people doing the same job of different genders are not paid the same. So that's actually a very significant piece of legislation that's coming down the tracks, and employers are tearing their hair out, aren't they, Sharon? Because the government hasn't produced the legislation yet, and employees are going to be able to have the right to ask about, their peers and colleagues, what's the information, what are the pay ranges, and employers are going to have to be very clear why they are paying two people of different genders in the same job at different rates. So I think it's going to be a very significant piece of legislation.
ありがとうございます。EU、すいません。EU 指令の中で2点挙げていただきました。一つは、労働者性に関する、指令というのと、あと一つは、ジェンダーの文脈での賃金支払いの透明化という点を挙げて、いただきました。 まず一つ目から労働者性についてからお話を伺いたいんですけれども、アイルランドでは労働者性と言っていいんでしょうか、労働者なのか、労働法が適用される、労働者なのかという点についても予測可能性、法的安定性があるというお話でした。日本はこの点、非常に抽象的で、従属性があるかですね。従属性の程度は一言で言うと従属性の程度によって決まるというふうに言われていて、明確な基準がないんですね。それも今議論されているんですけれども、総合判断ということになります。で、アイルランドではどのような明確な判断基準というのがあるのか教えていただけますでしょうか。
I mean, it's predictable insofar as there is like the legislation, legislative framework, but ultimately, if you go to the WRC, it's still a single adjudicator, a single person making the decision, and that can be unpredictable. So you go before an individual who's interpreting the case, interpreting the law, and it's their decision as to whether they're going to uphold your case or not uphold your case. So there is still unpredictability when you go to court ultimately, because we can go to the WRC and we know that when we go in there, we know either this or either that, depending on the individual, because we know the people. Because we know the judges, we know which judge is going to go our way and which judge isn't going to go our way. So the uncertainty isn't in the law; it's in the person, the adjudicator or the judge deciding it. So, you'd agree with that, yeah?
Yeah. No, I would agree with that, but I think the key thing for us as employers when we end up in the WRC, and Colleen is representing us, that we have followed a fair procedure. And that our documentation is perfect, that we don't blindside our legal counsel, that we're really clear. But our legal counsel is very important to us because they will point out to us if there's a concern or there's a risk. So then you can predict in some way if you're going to win or lose a case, And I have to say we have a really good track record, within our business because we're very clear around process, procedure, documentation. We don't like managers making quick decisions or going off doing their own thing. It's not good. It's not good for business, but it does happen. And when that happens, we don't know what the outcome may be, but we've got really good legal counsel to support us and, fight our case, ensure that our witnesses, i.e. those who made the decision in the business, are well prepared before they go into court. So all of that does add up, But I would agree with Colleen says, most definitely. So it's getting the balance right, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, my job is even though I'm a lawyer, my job is to keep my clients out of court, not in court, and to make sure what they're doing, we've done it safely. So, and we've done as much fair procedure, and then after that, then it depends on the judge that you get. Then, yeah.
ありがとうございます。また労働紛争に関連して伺いたいんですけれども、WRC というのはおそらく行政での紛争解決制度だと思うんですが、そこで、解決できないものが労働裁判所に進むということでしょうか。実際その WRC で解決するものの方が多いのか、それとも裁判まで行くケースもかなり多いのか、このあたりについても教えていただけますか。
Well, the WRC is called the Workplace Relations Commission, and even though it's it's not necessarily just administrative, it's a body that interprets legal rights and makes legal awards. So it has the power to do that. So it's a little bit more than an administrative body. So it's the body where all cases have to go through the WRC. So it's the main court to some degree that we would consider court in Ireland. There's you have to give evidence on oath. You have to put legal argument. there's cross-examination. So it's run like a kind of a mini court almost. So everything has to go through the WRC, and then you have a right to appeal it to the Labour Court, which is this is a one-panel person, and then it's a three-panel person at the Labour Court. And then again, on a point of law, you can appeal then to the High Court. So all the employment legislation goes through the WRC. But separate to that, you can have like a breach of contract claim or a restricted covenants or a personal injury claim that would go through the judicial court procedure, which is a bit separate. But everything starts at the WRC, like equality, unfair dismissal, working time terms and conditions.
ありがとうございます。WRC に、全て行くっていうことですけれども、企業内で紛争を解決するチャンネルっていうのはあるんでしょうか？例えば、労働組合がそのこの役割を担っているといったことはあるんでしょうか？
So at CPL, we don't recognize trade unions. So if somebody wishes to make a complaint about how they've been treated or raise an issue, they would go through what's called our grievance procedure. And we would have a very clear policy on our grievance procedure. So we always try to deal with matters on an informal basis, even under that policy. So where we would get the two parties together to discuss their issues and try to come to a resolution. And then if that isn't acceptable, the individual can then move to a second stage and they can raise it with HR, who then more than likely would appoint somebody to investigate it independently and then make recommendations. So we would always try to exhaust that. And the last person within the organisation that a grievance would go to would be the CEO. That would be the highest person within the organisation, the chief executive officer. So, and then that, at that level, then the decision is final. And then if the person is still not happy, they can make a claim under the Industrial Relations Act if they want. So where it goes to the WRC under that legislation, but the WRC would only make a recommendation. It's not binding. So, but I don't know if you have anything to add, Colleen, if I've missed anything. That's from a CPL perspective.
Sometimes, the WRC does have a mediation in it, but it's quite limited, isn't it? So, but sometimes if you're dealing with a senior executive, like a very sort of senior person in the business, sometimes what you have is legal mediation, where you have like, do you have like a senior counsel, like a barrister? Do you have barrister, solicitor in? You don't, yeah, or a lawyer. So we have, like a senior counsel. They would lead a formal mediation, and we would try and resolve things in a legal privilege setting. That's when it's typically when there's like a senior exec. It's very effective when you're dealing with senior executives and there's a dispute, because coming to mediation, coming up with your own solution creates certainty. Whereas you're going to court, it's unpredictable. It could take a year or 2 years. So you come together with legal mediation and see if you can get a deal done. We do a lot of cases like that, but only really with senior executives, where you're kind of moving quickly and there's there's an issue, and you can come together and with a legal mediator and draw up an agreement, where you agree everything.
そのような企業内でのしっかりとした制度というのは、アイルランドのほぼ全ての企業にあると考えていいんでしょうか？社内でのその紛争解決の制度って先ほど、3段階あるというふうにおっしゃっていましたけれども、それ中小企業も含めて大体の企業にあるということでしょうか
？Yes, they do. Yes. So even from an organization that might have 2 or 3, 4, 5 employees, so from very small to very big, small organizations do find it challenging, because you would find that in smaller organizations, they may not have a HR practitioner to support them. They would also see that any disputes are very costly. Of course, they're costly to all businesses, but for an SME, it can add that added complexity. I know Colleen has, like, we have family and friends that have small businesses, and they find it very frustrating, all of these things that they have to deal with and all these changes in legislation. So it can be very problematic for SMEs, but it's the exact same.
Yeah, I would say any organisation we act for, we put together an employee handbook. There's always an internal mechanism for disputes that you will go through, and depending how big your organisation, it's normally 3 stages, isn't it? Informal, formal raise, and then appeal. And then for very small organisations, they tend to outsource it maybe. So if you can't investigate yourself, so you provide that an independent external person will investigate a dispute. That's how you would deal with it. Yeah.
そのあたりの社内の制度の、そうですね、しっかりした制度を社内に作るということも、アイルランドでは非常に普及しているというか、定着しているということでしょうかね。日本では、残念ながら中小企業の中にはコンプライアンスの意識がかなり低いところもあってですね、なかなかそういう紛争解決の制度まで導入しているところは考えにくいので、非常にその点は示唆に富むのではないかというふうに感じました。
Yeah, and just to say, like, when you go to court, the first thing a judge will say to you is, "What's your procedure? Have you followed it?" So, and that's how you defend your position, to say, "We had a procedure, we followed it," and then that you're kind of 90% way to defending your claim.
つまり労働者の権利意識も、強いということも言えるのかもしれないですね。ありがとうございます。2点目に先ほどのそのジェンダーの話についても伺いたいのですけれども、賃金の支払いに関する透明性が、欧州レベルで求められているということでした。で、日本の状況とも、やっぱりこれはちょっと違っていまして、日本でも、男女の賃金格差っていうのは、よく議論に上っていますし、現在は法律上男女の賃金格差を公表しなさいという法律もできています。ただ、日本の場合は、同じ仕事をしているのに男女で賃金が違うということが問題視されているわけではなくて、むしろ女性の場合、妊娠・出産が主な障壁となって、男性と同じ仕事に就けない、企業内でのポジションがどうしても低く留め置かれてしまうという点が問題視されています。ですので、賃金の決め方をどうこう変えようというよりも、むしろ育児や介護と仕事をどういうふうに両立していくのか、その両立を企業がどういうふうに支援していくのかという議論が中心なのではないかというふうに思っています。アイルランドでは、妊娠や出産がキャリアにとってマイナスとなるということはあるんでしょうか。それともさほどそれは関係がないということなのでしょうか。
Well, I'd say that maternity discrimination is still very significant in Ireland, unfortunately. It's still the case. Like, we act for, some senior executive women that when they come back from maternity leave, there is changes to their job, and they are unfortunately discriminated against. So it is quite significant. And now in the UK, I think they've brought some law in where the 6 months after when you return that you're protected, and I think that's quite effective, because I think where senior women get discriminated on is when they come back, and it's those first 6 months of reintegration into the workforce which is the most challenging. But there is kind of they've kind of addressed that, interestingly, so that's still there. I think in Ireland there is men and women probably on different pay, probably still a different pay differential. The gender pay gap probably hasn't addressed that. That's why the pay transparency will be interesting to see what happens there. So, I mean, we're not perfect. We're pretty good, but we're not perfect. So there is issues, I think, with discrimination, maternity leave, and I think there probably are men in the same job earning more than the women as well.
And I think in Ireland as well, one of the key challenges is that the participation of men in caring responsibilities is much lower than women. So women do take responsibility, for childcare, elder care, the whole lot. And that can have a significant impact on an individual's time away from the workplace and career and the demands. But as employers, I mean, from the organisation that I work for, we try to put in place, policies and practices that support both men and women, that it's not just one-sided. So, for example, we've done an awful lot of work supporting employees who may have challenges around fertility. So, we apply the same policy to men and women in the preparation of all of that around fertility, surrogacy, etc. So, and then like parents' leave, we encourage our male colleagues to take it. We provide some of that as paid leave, as opposed to just the statutory components to it. So it's the little things that you do to try and ensure that men participate in those elements as well. Also, when females go on maternity leave, it's making sure that they're still considered for promotion, pay reviews when they're absent from the workplace. They shouldn't be treated any differently just because there's that period of time they're away. And for us as an organisation, that was a big shift for our leadership team to understand that and accept that it's not right to discount somebody because they're out of the workplace for a period of time. So there's all of that, and I suppose the gender pay gap has forced organisations to do it. And although we're all reporting on it, nobody's really looking at it outside. But it makes you, as an employer, you're producing this report, you're informing your employees about it, you're educating them about it. So you have to be able to stand over it and follow through on those changes and commitments that you make. So listen, it's getting the balance right, but I think the male participation is really important as well, and that's sometimes the thing that we don't focus enough on.
Yeah, and I think that the lack of somewhere like Iceland gives support to full support. I suppose family support which enables women to go back to work, and I think that's probably a big challenge. There's not an awful lot of support. So it does still fall to the woman. I mean, at the end of the day, having a family is a joint decision. It's not just a female decision. It's a male and female typically. So it's kind of like, but it does tend to fall traditionally. But I think if there was more support for women and insofar as childcare at the state level, I think that would be a massive impact. Because I think in Iceland, 98% of all women go back to work after they have a child. Something amazing, yeah.
There's also, I know like in Microsoft in Ireland, they introduced leave for new dads. And I think it's up to 6 months that they can take when their wife is on maternity leave. Now that's unbelievable and it's paid. Now we couldn't afford to do that as an organisation. There is, so it puts pressure on other organisations when you see blue chip companies doing stuff like that. But listen, I think every piece of change that you make, whether it's small, it's adding to it. It's trying to support and bring about change. So, and I think that's important.
ありがとうございます。先ほど、出産した女性の配偶者に対する有給休暇っていう話ありましたけれども、日本も同じような制度はありますよね。産後パパ育休っていうふうに言われますけれども、配偶者が出産した後、4週間、有給、完全に賃金払われるわけじゃないですけど、賃金ではなく、保険から給付されるという形で、賃金の、 手取りで言うと 100% が保証されるっていう制度が今できています。そういった意味ではかなり制度的には進んでいるんじゃないかというふうには思うんですけれども、それでも日本の場合はなかなか女性のその管理職比率がなかなか上がらなかったり、っていう問題はあります。で、日本の場合大きいのは、やっぱ長時間労働という文化なのかなというふうに思っていてですね、ある程度その出世するには長時間働かないといけないとか、あるいは転勤しないといけないとか、そういったことがなかなかこうキャリアにとって、キャリアを積むにあたって障壁になっているのかなという気がします。アイルランドの労働時間っていうのはどうなんでしょうか。残業が一般化しているのかいないのか、また転勤等を命じられることがあるのか、このあたりについて教えていただけますか。
So obviously there is the Organisation of Working Time Act in Ireland, and the maximum working week is 48 hours. That can be averaged over a 4-month period. So, but like from a CPL perspective, like our standard working hours are 9 a.m. to 5:30. There is flexibility. We have a flexible working policy. We also have a balanced time policy, which is that if you need to take a couple of hours off for whatever reason that may be, it could be to play a football match early in the evening. You then just make the time up at another point in time in the week. What we find with our workforce is they want flexibility. And a lot of employers would use that to attract employees. And also since COVID with remote working, hybrid working is a must. In CPL, we have 2 days mandatory in the office, 3 days at home. You know, you can come into work, you can come into the office 5 days a week if you want, but that hybrid working is very important. What we also found as well during COVID was a lot of people moved out of Dublin. They moved back down the country to their family locations. So now to come back to Dublin is impossible. So I can, like my own team, I have, you know, senior people spread all over the country. That's absolutely fine. But I think employers have to be, you know, much more progressive around their flexibility and what they expect of their employees. But I would say it also depends on the professions as well within Ireland in terms of what the working hours is like. In our own organisation, yes, on occasion people would work long hours, but the norm is that it is 9 to 5:30. You know, there's I suppose a lot of talk around people's mental health, about their well-being, about stress at work. So as an employer, we have a duty of care around that as well. And I know Colleen might have a different experience working in a law firm, or traditionally law firms might be seen to be longer hours, but it wouldn't be an intense culture where working long hours is a requirement. We don't think that's good for business. It's not good for our people. So it's not something that we would push or promote. I think traditionally, or, you know, a long time ago, there might have been a lot of presenteeism where people, you know, were seen to be in the workplace and that meant they were busy, but did it really mean they were being productive? So I think from a HR perspective and in an Irish context, you have to look at all of that and be quite mindful of it.
I think I picked the wrong profession, being a lawyer. Yeah, we do work long hours. I think COVID has changed everything. I'm not sure whether you do remote working here, and kind of hybrid working is what we call it. So there'd be like 3 days in the office, 2 days remote, a bit like that. I do find that, you know, people do work long hours in law. There is a difference in generational as well. The younger generational kind of are more into lifestyle. So we look around the office and it's all the old people like me there. And the younger people have gone home. So you just think something's wrong. But there's been a shift in the culture since COVID, I think. Like, people aren't just there for the sake of it. You know, you can get your work done remotely, and people accept that.
それではどうもありがとうございました。示唆に富むコメントどうもありがとうございます。これより質疑応答の時間とさせていただきます。本日のご講演とディスカッションを受け、皆様の方からご質問していただければと思います。 ご質問のある方は、挙手していただき、どなた様宛てのご質問かもおっしゃっていただけると助かります。それでは、ご質問のある方、挙手の方よろしくお願いいたします。
すいません、よろしくお願いします。シャロンさんに質問なんですけど、先ほどちょっとお話にも上がりました、給与透明性指令ですとか、あとはその男女の賃金の格差をどう解消していくかみたいなところもあったと思うんですけど、今まさにその法改正っていうのがこう真っ只中っていうか動いてる中でどのようなその法改正に対するトレーニングをしているのかっていうのをちょっと伺いたくて、で一応ちょっと私がウェブ上で調べた限りだと、その御社のその教育のシステムっていうのが非常に質が高くて、国から認められるようなレベルのものであるっていうところもなんか見たので、ぜひお伺いしたいなと思って質問させていただきました。
Thank you. That's a very good question. So, from my organization's perspective, when it comes to employment law, we would train our managers very well around everything to do with managing people, and in particular understanding the legislation and interpreting it from a gender pay gap and more importantly an EU pay transparency perspective. Because the legislation hasn't been written or transposed into law, we don't have regulations or guidance from government as of yet. But we have been working on pay transparency from a HR perspective since February last year, trying to understand the directive, what may be coming down the track for us. And we do know that we are going to have to train our people managers and our employees on pay transparency, but what that looks like yet, we don't know. So, which is very frustrating as an employer, because June is only a few months away. But in general, yes, we do train our people very well. And also on an annual basis, one of the things that we do in CPL is we do like an annual training. So if I take data protection as an example, every February in each year, we have a formalized data protection month where we educate our staff. They go through training, they have an assessment so they understand their obligations, because they manage so much data on behalf of our clients and our candidates. So we're very rigid about that. So I hope that answers your question.
ありがとうございます。それでは質問のある方、挙手の方よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございます。シャロンさんとコリンさんと、あとも島田先生にもだと思うんですけれど、日本のその解雇が難しい、解雇率が低いっていう話がさっき出たと思うんですけれども、それがそのアイルランドの中でのその雇用の流動性での高さ低さにも関係してて、日本がその雇用の流動性低いという見方をすると、アイルランドってじゃあ高いので日本の低さが際立ったっていう話だと思ったんですけれども、だとするとそれが正しいとすると、雇用の流動性の高さと、あとその法的な予測可能性の高さっていうのが、どういう文脈でそのつながってくるのかなと。つまり従業員から見ると、いつ解雇される可能性が高いってことは、予測の可能性が低いっていうことにつながってしまうんじゃないかなっていう、ちょっと混乱してしまったので、その辺の背景的なところを単純な質問をすると、アイルランドはその雇用の流動性が高いっていうふうに考えてよろしいかどうかかな。
Thank you, Nobu. Very good question. So I suppose mobility in employment, it is good. People, do move jobs. I think more so probably in the last 15 to 18 years, mobility, people would move. What would, I suppose, stop somebody moving to another organization would be their reputation in the marketplace. So you've probably heard, HR terms like employer of choice, great place to work. All of that is really important to people. I think the generation at this point in time, they want to work for organizations that have a sense of purpose, are really clear about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they're also a responsible employer. And all of that attracts an employee. In an employee relations context, if an employer has a poor record of employee relations, it is known in Irish circles. Ireland is a very small place, so you would know very quickly if someone was a good or bad employer, and that would affect your ability to attract talent and retain people. Like I can talk about CPL. Like last summer, we made a number of redundancies because a part of our business has shrunk because permanent recruitment has reduced in the last 24 months. And we had never made such a large number of people redundant. And that impacted, I suppose, the morale within our business, and it has led to increased attrition. So we've got a lot to do as an employer by raising trust, and really, drawing a line in the sand and resetting where we are as an organisation. So overall, from a leadership perspective, you've got to be really conscious about maintaining that trust and confidence within your business. And it does all impact around your reputation, how you manage risk. There's lots of different components. So all of that is very important. Don't know if you have anything to add, Colleen. No? Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
ありがとうございます。それでは他質問ある方、挙手の方よろしくお願いいたします。
Could we ask a question?
もちろんです。はい。
Myself and Colleen would love to know how many HR professionals are in the room. Show of hands. Or just business, general business or legal? Has anyone any plans to set up operations in Ireland? Your company? No, not yet. If you have, you can always come and speak to me or Colleen.
Yeah, I thought maybe I could ask the professor some questions. See, she's asking us all the questions. We're going to ask her some questions now. We were talking before about there being 10% of women in management. I thought that was kind of interesting, and I just wonder whether you thought, because I know you have a new female prime minister, do you think that's going to affect things, the kind of perception of women, or an increase? Will that happen, do you think?
の見方になりますけれども、私としてはすごく大きな意味があるというふうには思っています。彼女の政策がどうというよりも、まず女性が首相になったということが非常に大きな意味がある。というのは今までいなかったんですよね。今までいなかった。で、私はちょっと比較対象としてドイツを検討することが多いので、例えばドイツを見るとメルケル首相がかなり長いこと首相を務めていたんですよね。で、ドイツの子どもたちにとってすごく影響が強かったというふうに聞いています。女性が、首相は女性なんだと。ドイツはすいません、細かい話、男性名詞と女性名詞で語尾が変わるので、ブンデスカンツラリンって、女性の場合はブンデスカンツラリンになって、男性名詞だとブンデスカンツラーになるんですけど、子供たちにとってブンデスカンツラリンなんですね。首相といえば女性名詞だったわけですよ。で、そして子供たちの将来の夢の選択肢として、女の子の夢の選択肢の一つって首相っていうのが入ってきたんですね。それはメルケルがあれだけ長い間在任したからだというふうに言われています。で、日本でも、彼女が首相になったことによって、 女子学生の将来の夢の一つに、政治家っていうのは今までいたかもしれないですけど、首相にもなれるんだぞという選択肢が、目に見えて現れたっていうのは、かなり大きな一歩ではないかというふうには感じています。そのぐらい日本ではなかなかトップに女性が立つっていうのは少ないことなので、その分非常にインパクトのある出来事なのではないかというふうに感じています。
So we have a female prime minister in Ireland. So it's all male prime ministers, but we have female presidents, but they don't really have the power. It's like, so yeah, it's impressive.
What about remote working or hybrid working in Japan? Is that seen as a positive initiative for employees? Is it common?
リモートワーク、ハイブリッドワークはコロナ禍で一気に普及が進みました。ただですね、コロナが終わって今は全員出社に切り替えてる会社がかなり多いのかなという感じですね。で、国としてはリモートワークを促進したいっていうところもあり、特にやっぱり両立支援、子育てや介護の両立支援との関係でリモートワークっていうのはかなり労働者にとってメリットがあるというふうに見ているのですね。そのため、例えば法律でですね、3歳未満の子を養育する労働者に対してはリモートワークを許す努力義務というのが、努力義務なので法的拘束力はないんですけど、自主的な判断でですね、リモートワークを入れてほしいというふうな流れはあります。ただ現実的に見るとなかなか全員出社の流れが強いという感じですね。で、特に日本では通勤時間が長いんですね。東京にで働いている方とか、通勤に1時間以上2時間とかかけられる方がいるので、リモートワークのメリットってものすごく大きいんですけど、なんでしょうね。なかなかその管理者側からすると管理できないということがあるんでしょうか。リモートワークの普及がなかなか進まないという現状です。アイルランドのお話を伺っていて、すごくその辺も格差があるなというふうに感じています。
And can I ask you then about part-time working or flexible working, flexible hours? Do you have that at all in Japan? Is it supported?
はい、ありがとうございます。パートタイムはたくさんパートタイムで働いてる人はいますし、法制度上フレックスタイム制度というのがあってですね、労働者がある程度自分でいつ出社するかを選べるっていう制度はあるんですけれども、そうですね、そこまで普及しているかっていうと、そこまでの話は聞かないですね。で、あとは、裁量労働と呼ばれる制度があって、ある程度自分の仕事に裁量を持っている人、上の方のポジションの人が多いんですけど、そういう人に関しては、労働時間の管理をしなくていいと。使用者としては労働時間の管理をしなくていいっていう制度は、あります。で、ただ、そうですね、ジェンダーとの関係で言うと、多くの女性はパートタイムで働いているケースが多いのではないかなと思いますが、パートタイム労働者と正社員との賃金格差っていうのはもう長らく法的に議論されている問題です。で、正社員の方が待遇が良くて、パートタイム労働者っていうのは非常に待遇が低い と一般的には言われています。
There must be a big difference in pensions for men and for women then, if women are working part-time and men are working full-time mostly. That must impact like later on in life. There's quite a big issue. Like in Ireland in the 70s, you used to have to leave your job when you got married if you worked for the government. So there's a pension gap between men and women, which hopefully is getting addressed as more women are in the workforce. So I imagine that would be the case here, like it's pension poverty. The other question I was going to have is just, around termination of employees, is that kind of easy? Do people have legal rights the way we have legal rights after a year not to be unfairly terminated? I didn't have any sense of that. Do you? Like, if someone becomes employed, how easy or hard is it to terminate somebody who is not performing well? Or do you have to go through a series of warnings? We have to do that.
はい、ありがとうございます。労働者に能力が足りない場合の、解雇については、日本では非常に厳しい判断がなされるというふうに言われています。企業としてはおっしゃったように、まず認識させる、あなたのパフォーマンスは低いですよというのを客観的に認識させて、改善を促すと、警告を与えたり、教育を施して、しかも何回かにわたり、やれることはやると。やれることはやったけれども、とても改善の余地はないと言われて初めて解雇が視野に入ってくるということになります。で、これは日本の雇用の特徴なんですけれども、多くの大企業では、新卒一括採用という慣習があってですね、大学を卒業した人を一斉にその直後に雇い入れるんですね。で、日本の大学は、いろんなランクの大学ありますけれども、すべての大学で職業訓練なんてものはおよそしていません。あらゆる大学でひたすらアカデミックなことを勉強させるんですよ。なので、大学を出た段階で学生には職業能力っていうのはないんですね。特定の何ができますっていうことはないと。それを企業が大量に引き受ける。で、これは、赤ちゃん受け渡しモデルって言われたりするらしいんですけど、企業が赤ちゃんを自分の会社に大量に採用して受け入れて、そこで育てると。赤ちゃんの状態で採用して、その各企業で育てる。伝統的な、今ちょっと変わりつつあるんでしょうけど、伝統的な社員教育のあり方と言われていて、それが前提となっています。で、そのため、裁判所もですね、解雇が争われるようなケースだと、その労働者に能力がないから解雇するっていうふうに、使用者は言ってるけれども、それはあなたの育て方が悪かったんじゃないのと、そういった目でどうしても見られるというふうに言われています。そもそも能力に基づいて採用してるわけじゃないんだから、育てるのは企業の責任なんだと、社会的な責任なんだというふうな、理解が、少なくとも伝統的にはある。そのため、能力不足解雇というのは、一般的には非常に難しいし、企業としてはリスクを回避したいので、なかなか踏み切れないということも聞いたことがあります。
And do they have to go to the court to terminate? Can the employer decide to terminate themselves? Or must they go to court? Or can they challenge it if they get terminated?
裁判になるケースっていうのは、実はそこまで多くないんですね。多くはなくて、ただ裁判になったら非常に面倒くさいということですね。日本の労働者、一般的に言うと、そこまでその権利意識が高いかと言われるとそうでも ないように思われます。なぜかっていうと、その労働事件、裁判まで、継続するその労働事件の数っていうのはかなりヨーロッパなどと比べると少ないですね。裁判への抵抗感っていうのがあるので、裁判まで行くケースは決して多くはありません。多くの場合は、労働者が泣きに寝入りをするケースも多いですし、行政による紛争解決の支援、斡旋、等で解決するようなケースもあります。なので裁判まで行くことは決して多くないんですが、裁判に行ってしまうと、昔は長くて10年解決にかかるっていうようなケースもあったりして、非常に大変なんですね。で、10年かかった挙句、解雇が無効になったりすると、10年間分のバックペイ、賃金の支払いを命じられたりするので、企業にとってはやっぱりリスクが高いということになります。
I don't think I'd have a good business in employment law in Japan. That's amazing to have to pay for 10 years. They have to pay while they're going through the court. Wow.
Is there a mandatory retirement age in Japan?
多くの会社では、今65歳か、60歳の場合もあります。この辺ちょっとややこしいんですけれども、国としては65歳まで、雇用をしろというふうに定めています。で、60歳定年にする場合は、60歳から65歳までは、有期労働者、非正規労働者として、5年間はこう雇うと。5年間、60歳から65歳までの間、非正規労働者だから、賃金はちょっと抑えつつっていう、ことになるんですけど、大体65歳ぐらいまで、働いてるケースが多いのかなと思います。アイルランドでもそのぐらいですか
？Yeah, so I suppose it's a bit complicated in Ireland as well because there's a change in the legislation. So the majority of retirement ages in company policies are linked to the pension scheme. So, but like for our organisation, and that retirement age is 66, but in our organisation, if somebody wishes to work beyond that, they can. And then we place them on a fixed term contract. So that's what we do. But I'm not sure, has there been many cases around it, Colleen?
From an equality perspective, under Irish law and under European law, strictly speaking, you're not meant to have a retirement age because it discriminates against somebody from continuing to work. So there is some case law, but the direction of the case law, I think initially we thought it was going to be like everybody could retire whenever they wanted to, but if the employer can objectively justify the retirement age, a set fixed retirement age, the courts are typically allowing that. There's some of those cases with the telecommunications clients where the courts have been a bit conservative about that and allowing employers still to set retirement ages, although from a European law perspective, you should be able to continue working, so... But I think most people, probably a bit later, between 66 and 70, people are kind of typically retiring. I think it will get later and later because people are in lots of debt in Ireland. There's lots of mortgage debt for buying houses. So people need to work longer, to pay their debt down. So I think it'll be, I don't think we'll be like America, because in America, people work very, they don't have retirement ages really. It seems to me they don't in the US in the same way.
日本では定年制は年齢による差別っていう考え方はあんまりないんですね。そもそも年齢、年功序列賃金という年齢が上がると賃金も上がるみたいな制度が伝統的に導入されてきたこともあって、年齢っていうのは別に差別の対象にはならないって考えられています。ただとにかく少子高齢化で労働力不足っていうのが問題になっているので、雇用する側もですね、何歳も働ける人には長い間働いてほしいというので、高齢者の雇用も 増えているというふうには聞いています。
はい、それではお時間の関係で最後の質問とさせていただきたいと思います。皆様の方からご質問等ございませんでしょうか。はい、ありがとうございます。
すいません。せっかくの機会なので、質問させていただきます。今、ちょうどそのジェンダーについてのですね、お話がいろいろあったので、少しお聞きしたいなと思ったんですけれども、今、日本だと、女性管理職っていうのがだいたい 13% か 15% ぐらいかなって言われてるかなとは思うんですが、アイルランドの方もちょっと私の調べた限りだと、数年前まではそれほど高くなかったと。ただ、現状であればその上場企業とかでいうと、もう約4割っていうのが女性管理職として活躍されてるっていうところもお伺いしてるんですが、政府からのその指令みたいなところの影響も強いとは思うんですけれども、よりその多くの女性が活躍できる場を手にしているっていうのは、どういう取り組みをされているのかなっていうのが少し気になったところなので、もし御社の中でもそういうところがあれば教えていただければなと思っております。
That's a very good question. And I suppose I think I'll give a little bit of a backdrop in my career. I suppose when I started out in HR over 30 years ago, there was no talk about female participation at board level, at managerial level, and that has significantly changed over that period of time. And I think ultimately that's down to diversity in the workplace and not just the female-male representation. From a CPL perspective, we have a female CEO. 50% of our group executive, i.e. leadership team, is 50%. Our management team is 52% female. And then our overall workforce is 72% female. But that's our particular type of industry. I suppose initiatives that we have put in place, so everything from maternity pay, we pay full pay when an individual is on maternity leave. We encourage people to come back to work, through flexible working options. We do our best to drive male participation around caring responsibilities. We have a father's toolkit, helping fathers, understand and deal with, family challenges. We would offer leadership training, both across male and female. We've partnered with one of the top universities in Dublin, and we've rolled out a leadership programme both for men and women, from below manager right up to senior level. And that's really important in terms of driving skill. There's also a group in Ireland, it's called the 30% Club, and it's where organisations collectively come together to talk about, driving female participation at a senior level. And one of the great programs that they do in that is they do a mentorship program where you identify in your organisation high-performing female individuals, and they're assigned with a mentor from another organisation. So, and all of these things, they don't make it perfect, but they start the conversation. We're also very keen within my organisation of promoting female role models. So International Women's Day is a very big day within our organisation, as is International Men's Day. So we promote male and female role models all the time within our organisation. And I think when younger people see that, they see how females and males, can progress within the workplace and the supports. All of that does all add up. It makes a difference. And I think give an opportunity to everybody. But we've also extended it further than that, particularly across diversity. So we have different network groups within our organisation that support people through different life stages. So it's about taking very much a whole holistic approach of the employee and, looking at the different points in time of their life. Because some employers would be of the view, well, what happens outside the workplace has got nothing to do with me. We would have a very different view within CPL. You spend most of your time within the workplace. So, all of the supports and initiatives that we provide, we've, as far as we're concerned, that's very important to us because it impacts the experience that you have. And I always think, and I've tried to drill it into our senior team, is that, if you're good to your people, they're good to your clients. And it's a very simple thing. So it all comes round and it all helps everybody. So there's not one particular ingredient. It's touching on a lot of different things that impact people in very different ways. But I think we're a bit of a unique organisation because we have a 72% female workforce as it is, whereas you might find in other male-dominated sectors, it's maybe a little bit harder for women, maybe to progress. But it's about the attitude, and it has to start from the top. And we've got a really great female CEO, and she advocates, for fairness and transparency and promoting everybody equally, not just females. And that's really important. And we always recognise each other in that context. So I don't know if you've anything to add, Colleen.
CPL gets the gold star, you see. But yeah, it is effective, that 30% club. I think when it first started off, I think there was 12% representation in Ireland in 2015 of women on boards. And by the 2020s, it's gone up, it's past 30%. I mean, I think 30% is a bit low anyway. They should have gone for 50% club, to be honest. That's what they should have done. I mean, there has been some kickback, with the Trump kind of withdrawing the diversity, equity and inclusion. But yeah, I think when I've been advising companies who are seeking to withdraw from those kind of types of initiatives, in Ireland, people have kind of largely ignored them and are kept with the kind of program because, ultimately there is a very strong equality legislation in Ireland. So, that the US counterpart might be withdrawing from certain initiatives, but Europe has tended to sort of they've kept with their own path and kept going with it. That's happening over there. It's not. We have our own kind of system here, so that hasn't impacted those initiatives in Ireland.
And I think just to add to that, you would have an awful lot of American organisations that have headquarters in Ireland, and in America they have been very vocal and public and said that they don't support certain diversity groups. But in Ireland, those same companies have said, well, we do, and we're not changing. And I think that's been very powerful. And I think there's the generation, the young generation in Ireland at the moment, they want to work for organisations that, there is a very strong lens around diversity, equity and inclusion. They don't want to work for an organisation that doesn't respect that. Like marriage equality, is in Ireland. And all of that is really important. And I think if it was taken away, it'd be detrimental to us as a society and as an economy.
それではシャロン様、コリン様、島田先生どうもありがとうございました。それではこちらの方で閉会させていただきますが、本日は本当にお忙しいところご参加いただきました皆様ありがとうございました。並びにご講演いただきましたシャロン様、コリン様、島田先生どうも本当にありがとうございます。こちらをもちましてアイルランドアットワークシンポジウムを閉会いたします。皆様本当に今日はありがとうございました。